by which developers choose the publisher? By what criteria you are like looking for from the publisher?
When we are seeking a publisher, the main criteria was like more like it also depends on the studio, but for us the main criteria was if the publisher can do. If you work in pay-per-prototype model, you mostly focus on trying more games, but you lack the quality on those projects. That's exactly like the
I have a small addition to make on that. As Ruby Games, we're not really working with publishers anymore, we're self-publishing games, but when we did work with publishers, the number one thing that we looked for was transparency. And by that I mean, are they providing the data, the real data that our games have made? And you know, also we see that a lot of publishers have giving out game ideas, the same game idea to lots of different developers, and then just pick the best one and then just publish that. So for us, it's a big no-no. So that's one thing that we were looking for, transparency.
Yeah, and for us, besides everything that was told already, we also hugely value our publishers' expertise in games. Because at one point you just have to pick an idea and develop it, and we want publishers to be helpful here as well. And of course their ability to scale games well. So that's it.
Got it. Another question is how do you see the market change over the past 1-2 years? Like which the difference between 2021 and 2020? 2020, do you see the changes, and what is the changes between past years right now?
The main big difference is obviously the iOS 14, the IDFA, the IDFP stuff. But apart from that, we also see the hyper-casual industry always changes, it always evolves. Like the hit games we saw in 2019 and 2020, they're not going to scale well in 2021. And it's really the core of hyper-casual games, because the audience is always looking for something different. We saw a huge spike in brain games, brain puzzle types games, and then we saw a huge spike in simulation games. But there's always a trendsetter, and there's always trends that are changing. Maybe it's 2D games, maybe it's 3D games, maybe it's puzzle games. And recently we see that, especially with the new runner games from Rolik and Voodoo Games, a lot of things obviously apply a role in these changes, but the most recent thing that changes the industry, I think the addition of the virality from TikTok games, from TikTok. And we see that a lot of games are able to scale well on TikTok, and virality has a huge impact on games nowadays. So, yeah, it's always changes, and there's always a new trend. So we should just focus on trying to catch that trend.
Yeah, totally agree. But also, we have a huge impact from the quality of production, because users want better games with each year, and you have to be on schedule with the quality you're providing.
I can answer this question from our history actually for the last three or 2 years. In 2019 we had 2 IO hit games, and we had really good downloads from those games. But in the next year there were like no more IO games in the next year. So that's also a sign of the trends changes drastically. So you need to update yourself too. So we need to directly update our studio into a hyper-casual one. So we just focus on hyper-casual in the next year from creating only IO game studios. So the 2020 was always looking for CPIs. We were always looking for the best CPI, the lowest CPI from any genre, exactly. But the this year was also, this is changing with the iOS 14.5 changes, and from nowadays we are only looking for high retentions, but also good CPI too in the end. But this will also change, I'm sure about it, and you always have to update yourself not only from the trends, but also the changes on the market, the changes on the marketing part too. So that's what you should always do.
Got it. Actually, by the way, this is very interesting. But on what KPIs are you looking for right now in terms of the previous market? Like 2 years ago, we looked for the low CPI, and right now somehow the publishers look for also the playtime, day one. Which KPIs are you like see from your games right now in terms of the publishing, like only CPI or maybe other metrics more important right now? Because I know that 2 years ago CPI was most important, but right now I see how some of the publishers see the playtime, sometimes the number of sessions, and then probably if the CPI is not that good, improve them with the creatives and other. Which KPIs are for you most important?
Can I go with that? Yeah. Actually, yeah. The start of the hyper-casual it's not the genre; it's a monetization model, right? So there are like a lot of subgenres, more than 14 currently, like which actually result in different KPIs for the project that you're working on. So, for example, if you're going with a satisfied project, satisfied game, then usually the retention is not that high. If you're going with the runners, or if you're going with some kind of math game, 2048, something like that. So the playtime, the retention, etc. This is like the small KPIs for measuring the ROI. So if the CPI was the king at the beginning, right now the ROI is the king, because there are different projects that show high CPI, for example, like hyper-hybrid games, but still they're very viable in terms of scaling and monetization, etc. And if you're doing the development job good, and you're getting the KPIs, then you're good to go with the hit. But other than that, you have to look at the number of the metrics depending on the gameplay that you're developing currently. Because sometimes it doesn't really, you don't need to look at the playtime, it just doesn't going to do any sense.
The most important that low CPI and higher the LTV should be
the difference between that, these two.
Yeah, there's sometimes, for example, your game could be the CPI with the 30 cent, and like day one 20, playtime like 500 seconds. But if for these low metrics, if you get in more LTV in terms like 50 cents, it could be a hit. So
yeah,
why not?
Exactly.
Yeah. So of course, CPI, day one, and playtime are vital. It's also important to notice how many impressions of ads you get throughout this playtime. So it could be 1 impression per minute, could be 5, and it's important.
Could be rewarded, could be interstitials, like whatever.
Yeah.
I can answer another. For the last years, it was like when you talk to a publisher, it was directly putting the KPIs that they are looking for. But I see that from nowadays, no publisher answered that question, that we have those KPIs to match. If you can't match those KPIs, we won't publish your game. Because the idea of, if you make a profitable game, the KPI, there is no specific KPI that you need to get. Even if you have a $1 CPI for a game, but if you have a huge retention, or if you have a huge playtime, and when you add the monetization, if you still have a good LTV, it's a profitable game in the end, and you can make a good profit from those games. You can scale the game, and that's a huge potential.
Got it. Okay. So we are here in Turkey and Istanbul, and we could start to talk about what is the market of hyper-casual games in Turkey now. Your opinion, how it's growing? To see there some results. Is there a lot of studios? Is a competitive market? Very interesting to hear from you.
Yeah, short answer from somebody not from Istanbul, Turkey. You know, Turkey is the first country that you hear when you're talking with publishers about different countries and teams from those countries. And Turkey is like number one when we discuss different geographic locations. So anyway, it's emerging and it's huge.
It's very curious how many teams and companies there which is focusing in terms of the hyper-casual. Thousands?
Maybe even more. I mean, I think the main reason I call this new trend the Rolex effect. I don't know if you guys agree, but with the emergence of Rolex, every guy who are making a game in their bedroom, living room, whatever, they started to focus their attention towards the hyper-casual games because Rolex provided a really good model for them. You know, they paid money towards the guys. Some big publishers were not even looking, and they really found the hidden gems in the country and then supply them with all the resources they need. So I think that's one of the main reasons that we see nowadays a huge.
In terms of this year and the previous one, there are also represent new publishers like Habs, like Crazy Hab, and other and more interesting. And in terms of Turkish market, also it's very interesting because I think half of the well-known gaming publisher in terms of the hyper-casual have a representative there, which is know the Turkish language, especially to cooperate with the studios. Very interesting. So is that market right now how is it? Is really competitive right now, or do you see where it's going now right now?
So, I'm in the industry like 10 years in Turkey right now. So I personally lived through all this process, all this growth, all the focus getting into the game industry in Turkey. So I have lots of to say, but I will make it in short. I mean, for us, we graduated from an incubation center called Animation Technologies and Game Development Basement, something like that. With us, there are more graduates that makes their companies huge. I can give fast examples like Alitus, Pantheon, Magic Lab, etc. Those were our friends working with each other and sharing all the information with each other. So, I mean, there are 3 or 4 more incubation centers like this in Turkey, and those centers are like more than 3 years old. Our incubation center was like 10 years old. There are more than 30 companies graduated from there. Right now working in hyper-casual industry. I mean, that's like 300 people getting into the industry. So, and also this is only from Ankara, by the way. We are in Ankara, in the capital city. For Istanbul, this is multiplied like with 3 or 4. So it's huge numbers actually. And for the sharing part, I can say that we actually share all the information with each other. We have a really good community sharing a lot of info with each other. Even though we seems like we compete with each other, but it doesn't work like that in the reality. So whenever I see a small studio trying to get into the industry, I always make a huge talk with them, giving all the experience I get from the industry, And I'm sure there are lots of people like me in the industry sharing all this information and trying to grow the industry in Turkey. So that's in general why Turkey is becoming one of the best gaming industry countries in the world.
Interesting, and also, is it right that it's a very young nation? Like here is.
Of course, of course.
So there are a lot of developers, artists, a lot of the creators of the game, and young nation. Very, very interesting. So in terms of the Turkey, there are some benefits between other countries? Do you see some or not?
Do you mean any relationship with other countries?
In terms of the hyper casual, do you have some benefits from other countries, like low costs or more people for hiring, or more like expertise and publishers who look forward to cooperate with the companies there?
As far as I know, there is not a specific country that there's a huge communication with Turkey. But from the other question, yes, we have a really young population, and also we have a really good focus on engineering departments that youngsters usually choose engineering departments, and I see that lots of computer engineers, industrial engineers, newly graduated engineers try to get into the gaming industry in Turkey. We got lots of applications from those departments. And also we have lots of departments like animation or other stuff, 3D animation and cartoon, lots of departments like this. And all these graduates comes into directly in the game industry. That's also, it's getting like, we don't need other people from other countries. We will start to over-explode in the industry in Turkey, but it's a huge thing. We really got lots of applications. I'm sure all the gaming companies got lots of applications, and every year there are more people getting into the industry.
Yeah, and I think one of the other reasons is you know, you hear this everywhere. The barrier of entry for hyper-casual games is basically zero, and that's really a huge impact on why young people in hyper-casual are creating their own studios. And especially with the new paper prototype models or paper models, I saw that a lot of people who are still in the college, they start their own studio because for a couple of $1,000s, you can support maybe 3 or 4 people, young people, but you can get together and found your own company. So it's really the time to maybe do it.
This is the. I'm curious. It's very interesting because in terms of the hyper-casual, it's about mass adoption. It's both ways. The first one is in terms of the audience. The hyper-casual is actually for the players and also for non-players who didn't play before and starting to playing the hyper-casual and then going to play the casual, mid-core, hardcore games is very interesting. And in terms of the development, the companies didn't know about the games at all, about how to create the games, starting like for the students, creating lots of the prototypes, then the quality is higher, they could probably publish some of the game, and then they creating the studios, growing, and then could start to create more difficult and more strongest game. This is very interesting in terms of this market. So interesting that maybe this is not a genre, but this is a mass adoption for all the market. We will organize a small interactive here. Please, hands up, who is in the hyper-casual market right now and developing the games? Great. who is here from the gaming market, but not in a hyper casual? Okay, who is here just a visitor and hear something about the hyper casual and gaming market? Okay, great. So mostly the people who well know the hyper casual. This is very great. We are talking about the KPIs and some metrics. Yeah, it's great. Let's start from the basics. We have time, so we could share some expertise from us in terms of the speakers and their experience about the basics of the prototypes. Let's talk. The first one is about the prototypes. Who is understand what is include the prototype? So we will start in like what are include the prototype. So we have like two parts of the prototype, which is testing. Yeah, the first one is CTR tests for the CTR test, and the second one for the CPI. Could we explain the difference of these tests? Who is using and in terms of the studios, who is preferable model of the creating of the games for the CPI or for CTR? Because sometimes it's a really someone not a bit belief in the CPI tests. Maybe you have could you share for your own experience?
Yeah, so CPI or CTR tests are mostly for games that don't have that much retention, like ASMR stuff, just to check if it's working. You could make a CPI test, short prototype, why not? But as said before, retention and playtime are also valuable, and therefore we prefer to have a CPI plus retention build that contains some content for a 10-minute playthrough, basically, for us to understand if there is some retention and playtime, and that's it. Just because CPI could be a bit higher, but once again, we want to have an expectation of LTVs that we can get with retention and playtime.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to us as well. We are always testing lots of different things, and if you think that this game could have really great retention and LTV, we try to launch it on CPI. But for CTR tests, we're actually not trying to create the game, but we are trying to create the creative. So that's why we have really short span of time for creating the creative. And we call it MVC instead of MVP, minimum viable creative.
Nice.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just a couple of days. We only add. We have a specific vision for the creative, and we only create that stuff in Unity and then just record it.
How many times it takes to product the MVC?
How many?
How many days to?
Oh yeah, it varies. It can be one day. It can be sometimes for more difficult projects. It can be up to 5 days. But it's really just.
Do you believe in the CTR tests actually?
I believe in trying everything. So, I mean, if we have seen a game that had performed well and then performed well in CPI, why not just try that? And if we really believe in the game and that didn't perform well in CTR test, we obviously take that into consideration, and if we see the potential, we took that on the CPI test as well. So.
I can go with that. As a publisher, we're actually trying to work with a team rather than with a project, so it actually makes us do iterations very fast, and if the team is young and they do not have a lot of experience, then we recommend to start with the CTR just to get all the feeling and the idea of what's the task, how do you run it, like what do you need to show on the creative, what's the gameplay, and etc. But there are different teams actually. Some teams do believe in CTR. I don't think that this is a guide that you have to believe in it or not. It's just like either effective or not for you particularly. So if the team is like very experienced and they don't know what they are doing and they have previous experience in doing great CPI prototypes, great CTR prototypes, so they can just go to the CPI just because they're experienced and will know that, so they could just not spend time on iterating and etc. Regarding the gameplay that you expect to have great LTV and great playtime, I'm sorry, but do you really plan a project that doesn't have great LTV? So it's usually like, you know, when you start a game, you're like, hey, it's going to be awesome. So it's kind of like, if you're not sure about the idea, you can just like 1-2 days go for the CTR, take a look. If it's not a hit, then you will see it at that moment. So if you will see good results in the CTR, it doesn't mean that you have a hit in your hand. So it means that you have a creative that is clickable enough to give you some chances of going with the right CPI. So this is kind of like different approaches. And actually, in our experience, we usually call prototypes everything that is not on a scale. So just because if you're going the CTR, then you're going the CPI, then you see the retention, the playtime, it's still not 100% guarantee that you're going to have a great project in your hand that's going to be profitable. So this is still a prototype, even if you're going monetization test or something. So actually, what we're looking at is the LTV compared to the CPI that we were previously talking, but we start with the CPI first, and we compare like what's the idea. Is it going to have huge retention that we can work on with great LTV? But if we do not see the CPI, we cannot just compare or even think if this is going to be successful. So different approaches required for different teams. That's my idea.
Yeah, on a quick note, as a non-believer in CTRs, because I've seen a lot of high CTRs and high CPIs as well on the same projects. On a quick note, once again, you can upload your MVC build to Google Play. You can get pretty much anything on Google Play and see CPI as well. Why not?
So yeah, it really depends on the gaming studio and publisher. Interesting. So in terms of the CPI, let's talk about the prototype. What should include the prototype, which is your testing for the CPI? Could share someone about your experience in terms of the production?
Well, beautiful visuals enough to generate a CPI and 10 levels to see how the in-game metrics perform. That's it.
The average quality in the industry is getting better and better every day. So, of course, for the first prototype, you need the close to average or hopefully above average in production quality that you can make a helpful test, CPI testing. And also from the in-game data, of course you have to add some content, like mostly in the level side. You need to add at least 5 or 6 levels to see a healthy in-game data. But we also had some examples like we didn't add lots of levels, like 1 or 2 levels, but even though we get good in-game data like good playtimes and good retentions too, so it changes of the originality or the good mechanic for the game. But mostly from our perspective, you need to always increase your production quality and also with the speed of your production. So that's why you should always invest on your team.
One thing to add is especially if the game has the element of randomness in it, just a couple of levels would be enough to see if it's actually fun. Because if there's something fun in that game and what you're doing can alter the gameplay and can alter how game is played, and then you can see that with the just minimum effort you can see if that game will be successful or not. So for the prototypes that have that element of randomness, just a small amount of production should be enough.
Got it. In terms of the gaming publisher, will be enough for the CPI test in terms of the prototype?
We usually, like quality is a very strong word, right? So we usually focus on the gameplay and the level design more than the art style, for example, because like in my previous game development experience, I had very different situations when we were heavily investing into art, and it was so beautiful. It was like wow effect and etc. And it did nothing in terms of like success of the project, and vice versa. So when you're having a great gameplay and you release it and it looks like awful, and you look at it and it's somehow a success, and you're like, how could it even be? Like, I mean, when you look at the game first, the thing that you check with your eyes is the art style, etc. But eventually, the gameplay and level design rules from our perspective, just because you can spend like huge amounts of money and time into art, but it may not just give anything to the project. So this is why we usually, when we see that the gameplay and level design is in place, then we release the game. And we try to iterate on real users rather than trying to figure out like what we by ourselves would say that this is a beautiful art or not.
By the way,
Short note, I believe that better quality would never harm your product, so,
It comes with business.
well, might be.
Like, if you just spend a lot of money in a project that just doesn't return in investments for you as a developer, then the developer is going to be closed, the publisher is going to be closed. It just doesn't, like, it just doesn't make any sense.
Well, yeah, that's true in case you have to spend more money to get better quality. Possibly.
by the way, this is a question for all speakers and participants. By the creating the prototype, which points or by what criteria you are focusing by creating the prototype? Which one?
I can answer that like this. Speed is still the most important keyword in the production, right? Still,
How many days do you create the CPI test prototype?
we tried different pipelines. Like we tried to make the first playable prototype in 3 days, and we made it gone through. But we realized that we were missing some points in games if we go that fast. Then we changed it into 5 days. That we said we should make a good playable in 5 days, and if we see a potential in this playable build, that we should focus more. We should spend some more days, and it should be like not more than 7 business days. And nowadays, if you were looking for a high retention game, and if you focus on in-game data, you should spend more time. Like it's 10 days for us, 10 business days for us right now, and in 10 days you can really make a good playable, good testable game, and also you can also add some content. Like you can also invest more in art style, and also make a less buggable game also. That depends on the studio, that depends on the experience, that depends on the approach, but this is our approach.
Yeah, pretty much the same here for a beautiful CPI, candy, delicious, playable build. We usually take 10 days, so it's CPI plus day 1 and playtime, you get all of it. And for this kind of MVCs, we have 5 days. So games are usually done in 3 days, but we take a bit more time to polish it further and maybe have different versions for creatives.
It's really similar to us as well, but the one thing I want to mention is that I can answer every question that you have as it depends, and you're gonna hear this from everyone, but I'm gonna say it once again. It depends. For example, one of our latest hits, Streamer Life, it was on the top charts a couple of weeks ago. It took more than a month to prototype because it was such a heavy load on art production. But it results in very good CPIs and really nice LTVs, so we were able to scale it in the top charts. So, you know.
Yeah, and probably you wouldn't get same numbers in case it wouldn't be as polished.
Exactly. Yeah. but that depends on it was a simulation.
Interesting. So from your perspective, right now we will talk about the concepts, and from your perspective about the concepts. So how are you inspiring by what ideas on the TikTok or somewhere, which channels you're inspiring by to create the concepts and then the prototypes? Could you share something for the developers?
TikTok.
Yeah, TikTok is the name of the game right now. I mean, if you look at the top charts, mid-grade games from TikTok.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, but anything can inspire you, just daily life, etc.
Yeah, but also not just TikTok, by the way, from YouTube as well. Pantheon released a game called 100 Mystery Buttons, and there was like really big YouTube channels that did 100 mystery button challenges, and then they take that idea and made it a cute game.
I can also add this that these talks are all about social games, of course, social trends actually. But you are not only creating social trends into games, there are also other original mechanics that trying to make the new trend, if you are looking for being a tier 1 hit, if you are looking for a tier 1 hit. What is the tier 1 hit? From the profitable side, of course, not only from the download side or other stuff. If you are looking for a new original gameplay, you can find it from TikTok, you can find it from social medias like also YouTube, etc. I mean, we are also searching into Steam, into Nintendo Switch games, newly released or indie games, of course, also. We are also even looking into game jams, that small games released in game jams, even though small details make some huge changes from your for your ideation too. So there are lots of channels and lots of ways to make good ideation.
Got it. Let's talk.
I want to add something. It depends. It depends on the team mostly, because if you have like very good game designers inside, then the best way to create new ideas is to play games. Just because, like, if you would be watching TikTok, you're not going to do a joint clash or something. Like the gameplay, like, it might be successful, but it's not going to be like very gameplay heavy. That makes this success. It's going to be like social trends or whatsoever. So you have to play games first of all, because like there are huge amounts of games, like AAA games as well. They have small mechanics that you could use. Actually, they're using like farm mechanics from casual games, so it's kind of like more and more combined. So play games to get new gameplay ideas, watch YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat to get more like CPI ideas of what to show, what is more and more engaged by the audience, and that will help.
Or mix it up, the top hits between together.
It's a good way.
Also, yeah. Interesting, got it. Let's talk about the teams. How many people, and in terms of the developing the prototype, working on the prototype from your perspective in your companies?
I'm pretty sure most of the studio will answer it like one developer and one game artist per prototype. That's the most common answer you will get. Also, it depends for the ideation. If you are trying to create streamer life, you can't go with only one artist. You need to make a bigger team for those kind of prototypes. But mostly it's only two people, and also maybe sometimes with a game designer. Also from our perspective, also one product manager too. So when you look into the game, it's like 3 or 4 people with the product manager and also game designer too. But mostly, most small studios goes with only 2 people.
Yeah, sure. And I have a small question about Streamer's Life. How much time have you spent there, and how many people did you have working on it, if no secret?
It's not really a secret, but we spent a couple of weeks for the first prototype, and then a couple of more weeks to make it a final product.
And how many people did you have?
For the art part, we actually had one main 3D artist, an animator. No, you can't. And then obviously for the small other types of artists we had, as the project moved along, we had a couple of more artists as well. And for developer side, I think we had 3 or 4 developers as the project went. But it always depends. So we started with one developer and then add a couple of more and then remove some to move to prototype. So it kind of fluctuates.
Thanks.
We usually recommend to go with for a developer, like we call team development company. Inside this development company, there could be different development units, how we call them, and usually one unit is how we recommend that. Like, is usually one game designer and 2 programmers, which helps the game designer to do the project manager job, the game designer job, and he's managing these 2 programmers, and they're trying different prototypes on different like time scale, ruled by one game designer. And once they see some kind of project that has the good CPI or something that requires to work on a project further, then they just combine into one team. 2 programmers work on one project with one game designer. They're still a team, they know each other. It's much easier for them to move on. And regarding the artists and modelers and etc., they're usually like out of the team, so they're more of a, they might be inside of their company, but they're more of a outsourcers, let's say, rather than the teammates. So if you need some art, you just go and ask them. They'll do all of the stuff. But other than that, the ideation process, the production usually is like only encapsulated into this.
So for prototypes, you don't have a dedicated game artist?
The game artist might be like in the team, and if the prototype requires some additional art that you cannot just find on the asset store, but you want to go with your personal art, for example, then you just approach the animator or artist or whoever you need. But it might also be somewhere outside the team, but still, like you just ask for it.
Got it, thanks.
Yeah, 2 last questions. Where do you see the future of the hyper casual in next years? Where is
Depends.
It's a bubble, it's gonna explode.
Okay, the last one. For the young studios, in terms of the hyper casual, from your perspective, your recommendations to young gaming studios focusing in the hyper casual, maybe some advices for them. Well, this is the last question.
Okay, maybe I'll go. For young people, if you're really ambitious and have the time and resources, by all means just go create your studio and try for it, go for it. But if you're not 100% sure, and if you want to move to Izmir, maybe, come join us.
So if you can advertise our company,
I don't use that.
I'll make a small advertisement too. I mean, when we were firstly founded, we were like spending lots of nights, 24 hour developing, focusing on only one thing and trying to make it in the best. This is a huge advantage for the small studios and also for the hyper casual, as we told, speed is really important. And the small studios and newly graduated youngsters can spend lots of time on development, and that's an advantage against big studios trying to make it in a better pipeline or in a professional way. But also, I see lots of small studios lost in the relationship with publishers or with the following of the new trends, trying to make the best ideation and also trying to make the best production too. That causes from the lack of experience, of course. So we work with small studios, newly adapted in the industry, with the way that we consult them with the technical part and also with the ideation part too. But they still work with a publisher. But we are just in the middle of the publisher and the studio, and we are trying to make them gain that experience, not get lost in the relationship with the publisher, and until they can feel that they can feel free to work with only by themselves. We work with them and try to make them get that experience.
I forgot the question, then they had an answer, sorry.
Your recommendation for the...
Oh, yeah, sure. An advice. So, develop good games and they come to you, publishers, and etc. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So, just develop good games, create portfolios, and reach out to publishers, and they'll help you with your games. And that's it.
Thank you.
My advice would be more practical. The worst thing that you can do is to build your game in half a year and then holding it with your hands, coming to a publisher and saying, hey, I have developed a game. This is the bad approach. What you need to do is run through your first 10 games that are going to be shit as fast as you can. Speed is the key. Just try it. After the 10 projects, you can just evaluate how did you go, what should you be focusing on, what do you have. Try different publishers, try to talk with everyone. Like, try to figure out what works with you, because it really depends.
Great. Thank you so much.
Punchline.
Thank you for the panel discussion, which is a great one. Thank you for the speakers. And we will start in the 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.